Hi everyone, Niall Paterson here, the Sky News Daily, on the way in just a moment. Our focus this episode is on Donald Trump driving everyone crazy by slapping tariffs on all imported cars. Ed Conway is here to explain.
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100, every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.
Tariffs are very concerning, and I'm really clear in my mind that the sector, the industry, does not want a trade war, but it's important that we keep all options on the table.
Now that is, of course, the Prime Minister. He was responding to the latest set of Trump tariffs, this time 25% on all cars imported by the United States. And given that's where we sell plenty of the vehicles we manufacture, the news came to somewhat overshadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves' absolutely, definitely not a budget yesterday. And you better believe this will be causing palpitations in both numbers 10 and 11 Downing Street.
It's enormous. And cars, they matter enormously because they are still the linchpin of basically everyone's manufacturing sector.
That's Sky's Ed Conway. You'll be hearing more from him just a little later. First, though, let's get the views of David Bailey, Professor of Business Economics at Birmingham University. One of his areas of expertise is, in fact, the car industry. David, just explain exactly what Donald Trump has announced and why he's announcing it.
So Donald Trump has just announced 25% tariffs on imported cars and components. So any car imported into the United States faces a 25% tax. Not only that, a 25% tax on imported components into the US. What he is trying to do is to get Americans to buy more American-made cars and encourage production in the US by the likes of Hyundai or BMW or Mercedes and reduce imports.
So how much trade in terms of the automotive industry do we actually do with the United States?
In terms of goods trade, the UK exports about 60 billion worth of goods to the US, of which about 8 billion is cars. It's our number one export of goods to the US. The US car market is the biggest market for the likes of Jaguar Land Rover, which for many years has been selling high-end Land Rovers, Jaguars, Range Rovers into the US with great success. We've also got car companies like Aston Martin, Bentley, Rolls-Royce, Mini, also selling there. So it's actually a really important market for the UK car industry.
Is it just the premium end of the market? I mean, you just listed a range of cars there that, frankly, I am never going to own.
No, me neither. So, yes, it's very much the premium end. So the mass market in the UK very much caters for the European market. That's why the Japanese, for example, came here. It was to sell inside the European market. The UK is particularly good at selling high-end premium luxury cars globally, of which the US is its biggest market.
I mean, the UK car industry was once the pride of the world. Those days are long gone, of course. But what are the current structural and broader issues that are affecting the UK industry?
It was, a huge industry. We lost a lot of it. There was a kind of recovery in the early part of this century, right up until the time, roughly, of that European referendum in 2016. Big investment in the UK automotive industry. Output got to about 1.7 million, on course to be something like 2.2 million. Since then, it's gone into reverse in a very big way, partly because of the uncertainty of the Brexit referendum, which stalled investment, and more recently because of things like high energy prices, which has really impacted on the UK industry, and the pressure to convert to electric vehicles where demand is not taking off quickly enough.
Just though in terms of the importance of the US market, it's a huge market, we sell an awful lot of cars there, but wouldn't it be possible for the domestic car industry to refocus their efforts elsewhere, the European Union, the rest of the world?
It could, but that takes time. They can't do it by April the 2nd. It's going to take a long time to find alternative markets. And there are markets that are growing, the Middle East, China, and so on. But the US has been hugely important for the UK auto industry because British brands are highly respected and well known there. Rolls-Royce, Bentley, Aston Martin, Land Rover, Range Rover. They've had a long presence in the market. They've built that up over many years. Replicating that elsewhere will take some time.
But when you look at those British kind of top mark producers of cars and compare and contrast with their competitors on the continent, I suppose the one advantage that those on the continent have is they have at least some factory production in the United States. That's ultimately what Donald Trump wants, is for us to make our cars, but over there.
That's right. So if you look at Mercedes, BMW, Audi, which is owned by Volkswagen, they're already looking at shifting production from Europe to the United States to try and avoid the worst of the tariffs. Jaguar Land Rover doesn't have that option, doesn't have a North American plant. Although, if this is permanent, they might look at that, I think, in the long term. But even shifting production to the US, it kind of doesn't completely escape the tariffs because imported components are still affected. Now, Donald Trump has said that a 100% US-made car isn't going to be affected. There is no such thing as a 100% US-made car because supply chains cross borders and cars made in the US, at the very least, will have components from Canada and also Mexico. It was interesting, for example, that letter from Tesla to the US government a couple of weeks ago, which nobody signed, by the way, they were too scared of being fired, said tariffs will have an impact on us, both in terms of retaliatory tariffs, but also because there's a limit to how much we can actually source components in the US. So this is going to negatively impact on the firm. So even production in the US is ultimately going to face higher costs and higher prices for consumers.
The motor industry in the United Kingdom hasn't been rushing to get in front of the cameras. I mean, David, do you live and breathe this stuff right now and will be speaking to those in the industry? How concerned are they?
Very concerned. So the UK auto industry is operating well below capacity. There are question marks about the viability of some plants going forwards. The government has increased costs in terms of national insurance contributions, minimum wages, energy costs are very high. So this is very much a perfect storm for the industry. And I do think the government is going to have to think about what short-term support it may need to give so that it can get through to a long term.
Thanks, David. Look, let's stick with the potential impact of those tariffs. Ed Conway is our economics and data editor. Ed, just how significant is this from Donald Trump?
So here in the UK, pretty much any company that makes something metallic probably has some part of their order book which is accounted for by either a car maker or someone who makes components for cars. So it's kind of right in the middle, it's at the heart. And it's the same thing in America. And I think part of the reason that Donald Trump wants to do this is that he's seen that you have to go back to the 1960s to find a period when the US exported more cars than it imported. It has become more and more dependent on imported cars. And if there's one thing Donald Trump hates, it is a trade deficit, which is what there is for cars. And so it's not surprising, but still the scale of it and the abruptness of it and the speed with which it's coming in, and it's not just cars, but it's also the components inside cars. This, if imposed in this way, it is massive.
Look, you just mentioned the car components there. It's the parts that are going to cause the broader issues, not just in the UK, not just in the European Union, but in the United States as well.
Yeah, so there's going to be kind of a calculation as to how much you have to pay, even if the car is made in America, based on where all of the different components actually came from. And so which would you guess is, of all of the car companies in America, the least vulnerable of all to these tariffs? Neil?
Scratching my chin here.
Might it be someone who is quite close to the White House? In fact, is
fond of a baseball cap?
Working at the White House, wearing a baseball cap, you never know what it's going to say, a man called Elon Musk. Because of all of the companies selling cars in America, the least vulnerable is Tesla. They'll still have to pay something because some of the chemicals going into their batteries come from overseas. So there's still bits and pieces in those cars that are not American. But Tesla is less vulnerable to these tariffs than every other car maker in America, which may be a coincidence or maybe not.
OK, get your graphs out then, Ed. I mean, put a figure on it. We know that this will have an effect on growth. Can we say how much?
Well, when we had the spring statement, the Office for Budget Responsibility put out a set of scenarios, and they said, well, here's what might well happen in the event of a trade war. When you plug all of that stuff into the model, they worked out that essentially all of the headroom that the Chancellor has goes. The growth that we may be about to have in the next few years, that's halved, maybe even more than halved. Trade wars, and we are in a trade war right now. We're just trying to work out how long it's going to go on for and how serious it's going to get. But trade wars are very value-destructive moments. And it's not to say there's not logic behind every different party in this, much as there are for wars, for physical military wars. Everyone is trying to defend their best interests, and in the case of Donald Trump, he wants to defend the interests of his manufacturing sector. But along the way, it's massively value destructive. And so for the UK, it would be bad. Higher inflation, weaker growth, job losses.
Can I just challenge you, though, on your description of this as a trade war? You know, in my mind, in a war, one side fires at the other and the other side fires back. Right now, we're not hearing anything from the Chancellor about retaliation.
No, and it's notable the difference between what the UK is doing and what Europe is doing. So Europe is already saying, look, we're going to have a tariff on this, tariff on that. Britain, I think, hopes and believes that it has as good a chance as anyone to try and strike a deal with the United States. It's not going to be a kind of extensive trade deal, but they are having conversations. And what will it mean? It may mean that there's a tax called the Digital Services Tax. Mostly it affects social media companies, kind of Facebook, Meta and so on.
They don't like that, do they?
And America doesn't like that. So we could kind of get rid of that in return for having a deal on tariffs, possibly. But that is the strategy right now, is to try to hold off on doing anything retaliatory, and in the meantime to see if you can get a deal with Donald Trump. But it is a chaotic strategy to have, because no one has a clue as to whether it's going to be successful. It's not an implausible strategy. Now, I'll tell you the reason it's not implausible. Britain is almost unique among industrial nations in that we don't have a trade surplus with America. In other words, we import more or less the same amount of stuff from them as we send over there. And that's the thing that matters to Donald Trump. He looks across the spreadsheet. Well, actually, I don't know if he looks at spreadsheets, but he's looking at the charts, and he's looking at the numbers, and he's seeing that for China, America has a massive trade deficit. They bring in much more stuff from China than they send there. Same thing for Europe as a whole. But the UK is not on that list. And that is, as far as people here in the UK is concerned, that's the best possible thing we could bring into a negotiation. But like I say, it's not at the moment clear that that's going to be a winning factor.
But what happens if we can't, if those negotiations don't bear fruit? I mean, what retaliatory measures can we actually bring to the table? America is an awfully big economy. The United Kingdom's not small, but it's awfully wee in comparison.
Yeah, but it's not small. I think that's the point. We're still a big market for goods, including American goods. We actually import quite a lot of cars from America. We import a lot of other goods from the United States as well. So, theoretically, we could impose tariffs, and you'd have American companies which would be upset about it because they wouldn't be able to send their goods to the UK quite so easily. But clearly, it's not going to have a massive impact in the way that European tariffs, for instance, would, because Europe is a much bigger market. It is really a really hard situation that the UK government is faced with, and frankly, overshadows most of the domestic stuff that we've been talking about in the last 24 hours, because this is going to be the defining feature. And worth adding, we talked last week, Neil, about steel and about the extent to which steel tariffs are already having an impact. This stuff is not theoretical. These fees, these tariffs, are being paid right now.
Explain exactly what is going on at British Steel, Chinese-owned British Steel, we should say.
Essentially, British Steel is a set of blast furnaces and steel-making facilities, much of which is around Scunthorpe. They've got 2 blast furnaces. One of them's out of operation. So there's basically only 1 blast furnace making steel. Why does that matter? That is the last remaining blast furnace in this country. This country that invented blast furnaces. We invented modern steel making. And British Steel have just said that they are going to shut down that blast furnace, possibly as soon as June. And why are they doing that? Well, they say it's just not making any money.
Are we not in danger, Ed, of just getting our knickers slightly in a twist over all of this? I mean, we're talking about steel production. The UK doesn't produce anywhere close to the amount of steel that it once did. We're talking about the UK car industry. Again, we do not produce cars at the level we once did. And when you compare those 2 sectors of manufacturing to the amount of money going into the exchequer from services, I mean, why are we bothering about this?
Not that I want to kind of attack you, but the attitude, Neil, the attitude that why should we care because we don't make stuff anymore? I find it immensely infuriating, because we do make stuff, and it's like kind of giving up before the fight is over. Not that it is a fight, but we are still making this stuff. we shouldn't just give up on it just because it doesn't comprise as much of the economy now as it used to. And final thing, I'm moderately ranting at this point. Final thing is, we are in an era now, which is quite a scary era geopolitically.
Yes.
When being able to make stuff matters. Because if things, God forbid, get scarier, in the next few months and the next few years, then having the ability to make stuff is really important. Back in the World War II, what were the factories where we were starting to make the Hurricanes and the Spitfires? They were old car factories.
Don't forget the ships as well.
And the ships and the shipyards. Being able to make our own steel probably counts for something. And back to the original kind of point, British Steel have said the tariffs make it even harder for us to try and make a profit out of this place. We're going to shut it down. That is going to be an interesting roller coaster in the next few months, because I think the government is quite aware that if that furnace goes, if it no longer has any blast furnaces in this country, then there's a lot of other parts of the supply chains that go, leaving aside your question about, what if we need to rearm in future, where that steel is going to come from, because right now we import most of it.
So the steel industry on tenterhooks, the car industry on tenterhooks. Rachel Reeves is on several hooks right now, particularly given, in a few months' time, she is going to have to do a budget in which this will need to be responded to in some fashion.
Well, it will, and I think who knows what will happen between now and then. I had the feeling that yesterday and the spring statement felt a lot like a kind of keeping things ticking over rather than making any changes. Because in the event that we do get hit very badly by tariffs, and in the event that we do have to put more into defence more quickly, and in the event that we don't get a deal with the United States, then come the winter budget, I think then it's a very different conversation. Like I say, I think a lot of this is just a prelude to the bigger chapters in the story that are about to come.
Thank you, Ed. Just a reminder, if you've enjoyed The Daily, do be sure and give us a follow. It'll just take 30 seconds of your time, promise. Just have a look in your podcast app. That way you get our analysis just as soon as it's published every weekday evening. And you can help us help you. Let us know what you think of the podcast. You can fill in the survey. The link is in the podcast description. The Sky News Daily is back again tomorrow.
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kelnick.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100 every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.